I want you to close your eyes and try remembering what the silence of Kraid's lair must have been like in 1986. Before games came with sweeping orchestral scores, there was just the rhythmic, pulsing hum of an alien world that is fighting you from going deeper. When Metroid debuted on the NES, it was as much of a game as it was an experience in unadulterated isolation. It was a game that fought a war against its own hardware, giving a sprawling H.R. Geigerian labyrinth and no map. At times, it demands pixel-perfect precision and saddled us players with a password system that felt like a second job to keep up with. The original Metroid embraced its friction, utilizing hardware limitations to immerse the player. But so many things change by the time we get to 2004. McDonald's has to respond to a documentary, Super Size Me. The prequel to Christopher Nolan's Odyssey was released. Green Day predicted the 2016 and 2024 elections with Jude Law has since held the title of sexiest man alive. In my heart, anyway. And Metroid Zero Mission arrived. Not just a remake, but a complete reimagining of the soul of the entire series, of Samas Aran herself. Zero Mission took the hardware-forced dread of the 8-bit game and chose to replace it with intentional and beautiful storytelling. This is a video about dissecting this evolution, looking at how Nintendo took a near-blank slate and used it to define the DNA of the galaxy's greatest space adventurer. But was that friction of the 1986 classic a necessary ingredient for a haunting adventure? Or did Zero Mission actually fulfill a promise that the NES simply was not powerful enough to keep?
Did we just do it?
A lot happened between 1986 and 2004. In the original Metroid, Samus Aran is not some agile bounty hunter. The girl is a tank.
Hey, what you doing out here with all this ass? Double cheeked up on a Thursday afternoon, hella ass, the sun is still out.
She moves on a stiff grid with a heavy yet crazy vertical jump. On the NES, you must commit to every single leap. Any mistake could end in catastrophe. You cannot crouch, aim diagonally. Your movement is as limited as the Nintendo Entertainment System. While these aspects are not necessarily a design choice as much as working within constraints, it became one of the defining characteristics of the experience. It forced characters to proceed with caution because, in a way, they are stuck in a bog of limitations. Or as Yoshio Sakamoto, longtime runner of the Metroid franchise, would note in a 2003 interview, "A gloopy, alien-like world."
Use, you lose.
This is only exacerbated by a lack of a map. Without a guide, the repetitive corridors become a labyrinth. You aren't just fighting space pirates, you are forced to fight the environment itself. Then there is health farming, with a secret system that requires pixel-perfect precision to master. One misstep could mean a quarter hour of shooting flies just to feel safe to explore again. It made you feel like a survivor, not necessarily a hero. Let's contrast this with Zero Mission, arriving at the height of the franchise's revival. Released 2 years after both Fusion and Prime, the handheld games were equally meant to be a new launching point for players.
I figured the type of gameplay in Metroid would be pretty rough for beginners. That's why I instead chose to emphasize the dramatic aspects and use the game's story to motivate players to keep playing.
Sakamoto knew it wouldn't be children sitting in front of the TV for hours at a time playing. It would still be kids, but most of the time they would have 15 minutes on the school bus, a few hours on a road trip if they were lucky. That doesn't only mean hints, but the inclusion of quality of life additions like the power grip and crouching. Genuinely, with the addition of augmented strength, Zebes becomes a playground instead of a barrier. You can mess up a jump, maybe get a lick of lava, but you can just pull yourself up and keep the momentum moving. This kinetic energy changes the pacing from a slow crawl to a high-speed hunt. Samus is not reacting to a hostile world, she is dictating the terms of engagement here.
I will look for you. I will find you. And I will kill you.
This is a shift in agency, and it's the point of the game. It is evident not with the inclusion of a map, but with the Chozo statues. You can argue they handhold the player, but to me that misses the thesis of the experience of Zero Mission. The question changes from a frustrating "where am I" to a tactical "how do I get there now?" It removes an element of desperation, but allows the player to focus on feeling the strength the character has since become known for. So let's talk about sequence breaking. In 86, skipping a boss fight or getting an item early was essentially a glitch or an oversight. But since Super Metroid, it has become part of the architecture. Sakamoto does listen to player feedback. His team understands people do love finding their own path, which is why we get time and completion rewards in the hidden galleries. Metroid wants you to break the game, not because you accidentally jumped into a door on the right frame, but because you mastered the game itself. This transforms Samus from a final girl into the legendary hunter we know her as today. The difficulty isn't gone, it's just now it is not because it comes with a lack of control, but because you have absolute control and power here.
The challenge is Metroid. The power is Nintendo. Defend the planet Zebes against the evil Mother Brain. It's survival or destruction. Do battle or die. Metroid only from Nintendo.
Because of the time of its release and the developer's understanding of the hardware, the original planet Zebes was built on repetition. Hallways of identical bubbles, black voids, and endlessly recycled tiles. And while this may not have been necessarily a choice, it did create a very specific psychological effect. It was claustrophobic, both tight and cramped and endless all at once. It is somewhere between a planet and a Salvador Dali fever dream. This planet doesn't have as much history as it is immediately dangerous from the moment you ride that elevator down. In Zero Mission, these abstract shapes are given memory. We aren't looking at a seemingly random assortment of platforms anywhere. The gloopiness Sakamoto described became Chozo architecture in the midst of being reclaimed by the planet. There is this subtle environmental storytelling until the game really hits you with new areas. As Sakamoto states, it's too easy to have players wandering around a huge map indifferent to their surroundings. I have to find a way to spice things up a bit and stimulate their brains. Now, I don't necessarily agree with Sakamoto here. There are fans of that original game. New ones as well, specifically for its sense of immersion. But there are fewer every year.
I don't want to play with you anymore.
That being said, you cannot deny that every room in the remake feels vivid and lived in. Now, there aren't vague shapes holding the power-ups, but it is clearly the Chozo themselves, Samus' adoptive culture that saved her and built her into what she is today. The game stops becoming another mission for Samus. It's now a kind of a homecoming, only to find a graveyard. Planet Zebes. I called this place home once. In peaceful times, long before evil haunted the caverns below. This sentence alone does more to give Samus' character than the entirety of her appearance on an 8-bit console, except for her base skills in Tetris. The shift can be seen in Samas Aran herself. What little backstory the Smash Bros. Mainstay had in the original manual would have been questioned at best, considering that same manual lies to you to preserve its final reveal.
Checkity check it, you rock the mask till we roll the credits. The player will think you're smuggling 2 eggs and a sausage downstairs, dong style. We let them think you're a dude.
Yeah, I got that.
Then we maul every 9-year-old in America with some truth.
Even with the manual, she was a silent avatar in a suit of armor. In Zero Mission, though, Samus becomes a character. Unlike in Fusion, Sakamoto proved he could tell a story without a line of spoken dialogue. There are the briefest of internal monologues for the player to read or skip during transitions, but these snippets frame Samus as the professional she is. We even get a sense of character and how the series has since learned to handle bosses. Back in Super Metroid, we were introduced to how terrifying Kraid and Ridley could be when their sprites were more than 2 pixels taller than Samus herself. Bosses in Metroid are now a cinematic nightmare, worthy of the 15 minutes you had on the bus to school alone. Both Samus and Ridley are further fleshed out in the tie-in manga that was released in 2003. But even without it, you can feel the weight the bosses are given. And if you are familiar with Samus's backstory, she isn't fighting monsters anymore, she is facing the demons of her past. By replacing that itty-bitty Ridley from the 80s with the beast we have since come to know the pirate as, Nintendo retroactively tweaked the power scaling in the universe. It is no longer a fun little survival adventure for Samus. It is a space opera where we, the player, help the hero grow in power as we do in skill.
I'm a badass! I'm a badass! I'm a badass!
Zero Mission is a game that proves you do not need hours of cutscenes to build your hero, just a world that reacts and a history that gives you reason to keep moving. Zebes did cease being an ominous series of uncomfortable caves, but the narrative landscape it became told the story of the woman walking through it. And as we are about to jump into how Zero Mission redefined Samus in its final act, I just have to hope you are enjoying this analysis. That is what this channel is all about, looking into the series and franchises we love to help understand why we love them. Next month we are looking at 5 Pixar classics that were planned in the same hour. So if that sounds like it might involve your childhood, you know what to do on YouTube. Metroid, the one from 1986, ends where you might expect. Mother Brain is defeated and we escape as the countdown hits 0. For more than a decade, this is how Samus's first mission ended, but Nintendo chose to pivot, add something new, and it would change the franchise, stripping the protagonist down to her barest essentials.
On to bigger things, how do you feel about skin-tight blue jumpsuits?
After their leaders are destroyed, the space pirates are able to shoot down Samus, leaving her stranded in the ruins of her old home without her power suit, with only a zappy gun in hand. The Zero Suit segment is how the developers chose to pay tribute to the slow, tense atmosphere of the original, turning a high-octane action platformer into a punishing stealth horror escape. This forces the player into a state of extreme vulnerability with Samus, and answers the question who Samus is without the suit.
Take that off. What are you?
I am death.
She is powerful not because of a cocktail of bird drugs and a suit of power armor, but because of her will and her ability to survive against all the odds. It shows this person behind the mask. It proves that her strength, and by proxy the player's strength, is built, not just mechanically given. After a few hours of mastering Samus in her suit, after you've become the apex predator of Zebes, tearing through Ridley and Kraid and crushed Mother Brain, you are turned back into the hunted. Every corner now hides a threat you cannot be prepared for, but with so much more intention. You cannot fight back in Samus' Zero Suit, only hide. The fodder for your screw attack are now hulking, terrifying threats that will end you if you misstep. This creates an amazing power loop that makes the recovery of her suit feel like one of the most earned moments in gaming history. When you finally get back into the armor, you instantly become the legend space pirate's fear. It also is a nice little bridge in the series lore. It connects Samus of the 80s with the Terminator she would become in Samus Returns. She has confronted her family's killers, become the stoic warrior that would avenge her adopted race in Metroid Dread. The materials we are shown of her childhood and the trials she passes moved Metroid away from being a series about an alien hunter and turned Samus into a more mythic hero with a journey that would make Joseph Campbell proud.
A hero properly is someone who has given his life to something bigger than himself, or other than himself.
Chozodia, Samus' Zero mission, proves that Sakamoto wasn't trying to fix the original. If that were the case, we wouldn't see re-releases of that 1986 classic. Instead, Nintendo wanted to redefine the character's legacy, taking the most iconic female protag in gaming and literally stripping her to nothing. The pirate base recontextualizes the entire mission. It turns a successful raid into a trial by fire. It ensures that when we look back on the original Metroid, we no longer see a sprite in a yellow suit, but a woman who walked through the enemy's lair with less than a pistol and walked out a legend.
I think Peach and Zelda kind of want me to be eliminated. It might be because I kinda sorta destroyed their bedroom with my gun arm.
For this week's shoot, we're getting in touch with your bad sides, and we've invited some special friends to help out.
That's your bad guy? Oh my gosh, you're gorgeous!
Ultimately, if you choose between the 1986 original and 2004 Zero mission, the question isn't really about deciding if one game is better than the other. It is understanding what kind of frontier you want to explore. The NES and Famicom original remains a piece of abstract video game design, an adventure defined by its rough edges, the unscripted terror that comes with being lost in a world that doesn't care if you survive. I might argue it is one of the most pure survival experiences you can find in retro gaming. That being said, Zero Mission is meant to be this realization of the Metroid mythos, a sleek, intentional, empowering transformation for both the franchise and its legendary adventurer. On one hand, you have atmospheric nightmare, and on the other, a tour de force of kinetic adventure storytelling. But I think it is together where they form a complete picture of why this series remains the standard for the genre that borrows its name.
Samus. ファミリーコンピュータディスクカードにアクション&メールゲームメトロイド
So thank you so much for spending times in the depths of Zebes with me, and just thank you for being. Just watching gives the energy to overanalyze film stock and 8-bit sprites until they look like Renaissance pieces to me. But I do really want to hear from you. Which game do you prefer? Does the Zero Suit add to Samus, metaphorically? Talk to me. I am in the comments, or we can just argue about the best boss fights. I don't care which.